Aisha was a beautiful and carefree young woman, living a peaceful life in a small, quiet town. She was the pride of her family, known for her kindness, charm, and radiant smile. Her days were filled with simple joys: morning walks in the park, afternoons spent with friends, and evenings filled with laughter. Life seemed perfect, untouched by the harshness of the world. But everything changed one fateful evening when tragedy struck. Aisha's parents were brutally murdered in a violent crime that shook the town to its core. The police were helpless, the town was shaken, and Aisha was left devastated, searching for answers that seemed out of reach. The loss of her family turned her world upside down, shattering the innocence she had known. As she sat alone in the emptiness of her home, grief soon transformed into an intense desire for vengeance. The world she had once known seemed so distant, and now a dark and dangerous reality was pulling her into its depths. Aisha's beautiful face, once a symbol of innocence, was now the mask of someone determined to uncover the truth behind her parents' death and bring those responsible to justice, no matter the cost. This marked the beginning of her descent into a world she had never imagined, a world where crime and corruption ruled, and where even beauty couldn't shield her from the harshness that awaited. Tragic event. One night, Aisha's life was forever changed. She had just returned home from a quiet dinner with friends when she found the door to her house ajar. A strange, unsettling silence hung in the air. As she stepped inside, the horror unfolded before her eyes. Her parents, the people who had filled her life with warmth and love, were lying lifeless on the floor, victims of a brutal attack. The house was ransacked, and it was clear that this was no ordinary robbery. The police arrived quickly, but the scene left more questions than answers. There were no witnesses, and the authorities seemed powerless against the crime syndicate that operated in the shadows of the town. Whispers of a notorious underworld group involved in illegal activities circulated, but they remained elusive and untouchable. The officers had no leads, and the case seemed to grow colder with every passing day. For Aisha, this tragedy was the cruelest of awakenings. The world she once knew, safe, calm, and predictable, was shattered. The law offered little comfort, and justice seemed out of reach. As days turned into weeks, her sorrow began to morph into a burning need for revenge. In the quiet of her grief, a question lingered. Why had her family been targeted? Who could be so heartless, so merciless? Aisha couldn't rest until she found the answers, and so began her search for the criminals responsible, a search that would pull her deep into the treacherous world of crime, a world she could never have imagined entering. Seeking revenge. As the days dragged on, Aisha's pain slowly transformed into a fiery, unrelenting desire for vengeance. The grief of losing her parents was unbearable, but what tormented her more was the thought that their killers were out there, living their lives without consequence. Every night she would replay the images of her parents in her mind, and the anger grew. She couldn't just let them die without seeking justice. Determined to find answers, Aisha started her own investigation. She visited local crime hotspots, interrogated informants, and scoured police reports. The more she dug, the more she realized that her family's murder wasn't random. It was part of a much larger scheme, an operation orchestrated by a powerful criminal syndicate with far-reaching influence. Her parents had been caught in the crossfire of a ruthless underworld struggle, and their deaths were just another casualty in a war she had never known existed. Frustration and helplessness set in as she realized how deeply embedded the syndicate was in every aspect of life in her town. The police were corrupt, unable or unwilling to take down such a powerful force. Aisha's sense of justice grew stronger, and she understood that she would have to fight back in a way she never imagined. She sought out anyone who might have information: small-time criminals, shady bar owners, and those living on the fringes of society. Through one of her contacts, she met a man who had connections to the underworld. He was reluctant to get involved, but when he saw the fire in Aisha's eyes, he agreed to help her. In exchange for her silence on his own illicit dealings, he provided her with a name: the leader of the syndicate, a mysterious figure known only as the King. This revelation set Aisha on a dangerous path. She knew that to confront the king and bring down his empire, she would have to dive deeper into the world of crime, far deeper than she ever imagined. The desire for revenge was now her driving force, and nothing, not even the dangers of this new world, could stop her from getting justice. First encounter with crime. Aisha's quest for revenge led her to places she had never dared to imagine before. The small-time criminal she had met had given her a name, the King, but finding him was no easy task. She had to delve into the criminal underworld, a world she knew nothing about. Her first real encounter with crime was both eye-opening and terrifying. One rainy evening, Aisha found herself standing in front of a dimly lit, decrepit warehouse on the outskirts of town. Her contact had arranged a meeting with a man who supposedly had information on the king's operations. As she walked inside, the heavy air was thick with smoke and the murmur of hushed voices. The room was filled with men who seemed to exist on the fringes of society, each one a stranger to her. And yet, they all had a certain coldness in their eyes, as if the world had hardened them long ago. Aisha's heart raced, but she held her ground, masking her fear behind a determined expression. The man she had come to meet was a middle-aged thug named Malik, known for his shady dealings and connection to the king's syndicate. His rough exterior and intimidating presence made it clear that Aisha was in over her head. Malik eyed her with suspicion, clearly not impressed by her beauty or her determination. "You sure you want to be here, girl?" he asked gruffly, his voice laced with disdain. "This isn't a game. People like you don't last long in a place like this." Aisha's grip tightened around the small pistol hidden in her bag, a last resort, though she hoped it wouldn't come to that. "I'm not here to play games," she replied coldly. "I'm here for answers." Malik studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You're not the first to come looking for the king, and you won't be the last. But be warned, once you're in, there's no turning back." As they spoke, Aisha realized the true danger of the world she was stepping into. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a fight for survival. She had crossed a line and there was no going back. The allure of revenge had already begun to consume her, and the more she learned about the king, the darker and more complicated her path became. In that moment, Aisha knew she had entered a world where trust was scarce, and betrayal was a constant threat. She was no longer just a girl seeking justice. She had become a part of the criminal web, entangled in a struggle she could not yet fully understand. Transformation. As Aisha delved deeper into the criminal world, her transformation was subtle at first, but became undeniable over time. The girl who once walked with the light of innocence now moved through the shadows, her eyes hardened by the loss of everything she once held dear. Her heart, once full of hope and kindness, began to grow cold, her every thought consumed by the singular desire for vengeance. The more time she spent in the underworld, the more she adapted to its ruthless rules. No longer did she flinch at the sight of violence or crime. Where once she would have been horrified, Aisha now observed it with an almost clinical detachment. She quickly learned how to navigate the dangerous web of the syndicate, how to manipulate people, how to gather information without drawing suspicion, how to stay one step ahead of both the law and her enemies. Her beauty, once her greatest asset in her previous life, became a tool, one she used to her advantage with cold precision. Aisha charmed and seduced her way into powerful circles, making influential allies in the criminal organization. She gained their trust and climbed the ranks, all the while suppressing any lingering doubts about the path she was on. The girl who had once been hesitant, full of empathy and compassion, was now a woman hardened by the brutality of the world around her. Her transformation wasn't just physical, though her appearance had sharpened with a new, almost dangerous allure. It was psychological. Every new step in her journey required her to bury pieces of the person she had been, to distance herself from the compassion that had once defined her. With each passing day, Aisha became less and less like the girl who had mourned her parents. The woman standing now in front of the syndicate's leaders was calculated, poised, and unrecognizable to anyone who had once known her. She was no longer driven by grief alone. Her thirst for power, control, and vengeance had eclipsed everything else. The change was complete. Aisha had become a shadow of her former self, and in the process, she had shed her innocence, becoming something far darker, an unrelenting force in a world of crime. Joining the crime syndicate, Aisha's transformation was not just mental and emotional, it was strategic. Her beauty, her intelligence, and her increasing ruthlessness had caught the attention of those in the higher echelons of the syndicate. After months of maneuvering, gaining trust, and proving her worth, she was finally offered a place within the wall,